Forbes reporter Paul Tassi is seething that the Acolyte audience scores continue to go ever lower across the board. And his biggest complaint is the fact that woke ideology is not being embraced, which kind of exposes his own leanings, as well as shows that he is willing to not only carry water for the Walt Disney Company and Lucasfilm, but he's willing to carry water for evil, because woke ideology is indeed evil. But before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at The Trent Report. Wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com. And Paul Tassi is not Paul Seethy. He's really not happy that the audience scores continue to go ever lower. He says it is embarrassing for the audience scores. That's right. He thinks it's embarrassing for you that you don't like woke slop from Disney Star Wars. As for the scores, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes for The Acolyte currently sits at 15% following the release of 3 episodes. The average rating for the show is a 1.3 out of 5. On IMDb, the rating currently sits at 3.6. It has an unweighted mean of 3.1. And the majority of all votes are 1 out of 10, 55.2%. You can see that on your screen right here. 27,000 of the 49,000 votes reviews are 1 out of 10. Tassi claims viewers are review bombing the show. He wrote this: viewers have now mobilized a fleet of TIE bombers to obliterate user scores of The Acolyte wherever possible, namely on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. And so obviously by making the claim that it's review bombing, he's saying there's some kind of ill intent. They're not actually sharing their opinions about how terrible the show is, which I think is an utter lie. I think the show is absolutely terrible. I discussed it on the WDW Pro channel immediately after the show released on Tuesday night. It is indeed an absolutely terrible show. It's really, really boring. Not only does it contradict numerous points in Star Wars canon, but at the end of the day, it's just a boring show. There's a lot of plot inconsistencies. At one point, there is a Jedi space helicopter hovering above a battle scene, and then all of a sudden, one of the villains decides to shoot up a bunch of dirt, and then the spaceship can no longer locate the fugitive. They've lost them. They fled into the city. It's utterly ridiculous. They should have been able to easily pinpoint where the person was. So you just have things like that are just utterly stupid, and there's lots of them. And it's just, and at the end of the day, as I said, it's just really, really, really boring. Like nothing happens, especially in the 3rd episode, aside from all of the introduction of canon breaking stuff. It's just a bunch of world building that destroys Star Wars. So it's like world destruction rather than any kind of real world building. They introduce the thread. They introduce a lesbian coven of witches that manipulate the thread, that have somehow created 2 twins using dark and unnatural methods of the thread. It's really, really, really bad. But anyways, Tassi claims that it is review bombing because a majority of the votes on IMDb are scored 1 out of 10. I don't see how that is any evidence of it being review bombing. That's just people saying they don't like the show. And there's lots of people who don't like it. And that's really what he's upset about. He's upset that people don't like this propaganda, because that's what the show is. It's propaganda. Not only that, he says that there are more reviews than previous Star Wars shows, more reviews for The Acolyte than previous Star Wars shows on Rotten Tomatoes. I will give him credit for that. That is true. It does seem like there are more reviews for others for The Acolyte than other Star Wars shows. I think there's over 10,000 plus reviews for The Acolyte, whereas like Ahsoka and Andor are kind of like plus 5,000. But if you look at IMDb, I don't think that argument really holds water, because on IMDb, The Acolyte has 49,000 reviews, as we just showed you. But then if you look at Ahsoka, it has 115,000. Andor has 169,000. And then if you go back to Obi-Wan Kenobi, it has 233,000 reviews. So The Acolyte obviously has nowhere near as many reviews as those shows right now. So I think that argument doesn't really hold any water when you actually look at IMDb compared to Rotten Tomatoes. Remember, he's kind of grouping them together in his article here. He then goes on and reveals why he believes people are rejecting the show. He says there are a bunch of dimensions to this, and none of them good. There's absolutely a racial and gender component to this. A clip from star Amanda Stenberg about making white people cry was shared tens of thousands of times online, taken out of context from an interview years earlier about her film, The Hate You Give. Showrunner Leslye Headland has starred in many YouTube thumbnails lambasting the woke nature of the series, but also it allegedly breaking canon. And indeed, she has. They've been promoting the show based on wokeness, which we'll get to. They've been promoting the show based on changing canon. And as far as that clip, sure, you can argue that it was indeed taken out of context. But at the same time, I think it does go to show that that is exactly what Lucasfilm was hiring her for. They wanted to emotionally manipulate white people in order to create sympathetic. And then I think that goes to my point that the entire show is propaganda. And this guy is just trying to defend propaganda, woke propaganda, which, as I said at the top of this video, is evil. And I'll get to that a little bit later here as well. But this is what I found absolutely hilarious. He actually does admit that people don't like the show because they believe it is lore breaking on a number of levels, from the way it portrays the Jedi as space cops to how it described how the twins of Osha and May were created by Mother Anastasia, likely through dark and unnatural means. So he claims he's not going to entertain that it's not review bombing, but then provides legitimate reasons for why people are actually disliking the show. You really can't make this stuff up. That's why it's all a cope, and that's why he's clearly seething, because he's lying to himself. He's lying to himself in the article. That's what these people like. That's what I find absolutely hilarious about these woke cultists, these SJWs. They obviously all follow the 3 laws of SJWs. You lie, you double down on the lie, and then you project. But what I find even more funny is that they're usually lying to themselves, and their own writings usually belie that, because they'll usually contradict themselves within 1 or 2 sentences, or at least between one paragraph and the other. They never are consistent on anything that they say or do. That's how deep their lies are, that they are lying to themselves to try and convince themselves of this crap that they're spewing. And Paul Tassi is definitely guilty of that. He would later go on and make it very clear that the reason why he finds it embarrassing that people are giving this show a negative reviews, rating it poorly, is because Star Wars fans are rejecting woke ideology, and he clearly wants people to embrace that. And he said this at the conclusion of his article. He says, "But the worst Star Wars project by an order of magnitude in the history of the series, and it just so happens to be the one mostly starring Black women." So there you go. He's implying that you're a racist if you don't like the show. And then he says this whole situation is a parody of the modern toxic fan base of the series. And then obviously women, he uses women there. So you're a misogynist too. I mean, these people are sick and evil. These really people are really sick and evil. Always trying to make it about identity politics. It's what they always do. This whole situation is a parody of the modern toxic fan base of the series. And if you want to disguise it as being upset about canon, then it shows a distinct lack of understanding of both the material of the show and the wider universe. However, he literally spends I would say the majority of his article, maybe not the plurality, it's not the majority, the plurality of his article actually going down and talking about the reasons why the show looks like it is breaking canon. And the only thing he has against it is like, well, the series isn't over yet, so we don't really know. And it's very clear, it's very heavily implied, and he even admits that it's heavily implied that is indeed what it is doing. But then he's like, oh, well, that doesn't really matter. Again, always lying, these people are. And lying to themselves. He's lying to himself. As for the woke ideology, as I said, we knew that this was what the show was going to be about. That's how they were promoting it. Back in 2023, actress Jodie Turner-Smith told Entertainment Weekly that the series is, quote, part of a wave of more inclusive and beautifully represented Star Wars shows. So that felt really cool. And I felt the importance of that, especially in some of the stuff that I got to where everyone really was excited about what they were seeing and what that would maybe mean for different fans that don't necessarily look like what you normally think the traditional Star Wars fans looks like. Because if there's anything that I learned from this show, is that the Star Wars fan is varied. So again, these people lie to themselves. Right here, she says, fans that don't necessarily look like what you normally think the traditional Star Wars fans look like. Well, what does that even mean? Because then she goes on and says, I've learned that from this show, that the Star Wars fan is varied. So like, what is she like? Again, lying to themselves to push an identity politics narrative and then trying to get you to buy into the lie that they're telling. We had Charlie Barnett telling Entertainment Weekly something similar. He says, I don't think I could have ever imagined myself as a Jedi, which is ridiculous because Mace Windu is literally a Jedi in the prequels back in 1999. What is this guy even talking about? Again, lying to himself to try and get you to buy into the lie. Yes, one, because I was not reflected for so many times throughout these films in the past. Again, a lie, but it was also something that didn't equate in my mind. I don't know about you guys as well. So then he's admitting that it's in his own mind that he's doing this lying, which kind of already talked about that they're lying to themselves. So to see such a diverse group played out now, I know that it's going to be a healthy reflection on so many other young people and old people. No ageism allowed in this. It's Star Wars. We can all fit. I think it's going to be really impactful. It's going to be a cool moment for me, for sure. I can tell you that. Anytime someone is promoting something based on diversity, it usually means anti-white. There's a whole article that I've discussed in numerous videos from Thought Catalog written by a woman named Emily Goldstein, who makes it very clear. It was written in 2015 that diversity does indeed mean white genocide. Like, she literally says that's what it is. So anytime you see this, that's what these people are talking about. And it's all about being anti-white. That's what it is. And you see that's how they were promoting this. So I will actually agree with Paul Tassi that there is a racial component to it. And it's because you have these people promoting this stuff that the show is indeed anti-white. Then if you actually watch the show, especially the first 2 episodes, there's only like 2 significant, put that in quotes, white characters. One is a Jedi Master who immediately self-deletes himself after May is like, you are a terrible person. And he says like, oh, we thought we were doing good. And then he literally drinks a vial of poison to kill himself. Utterly ridiculous and disgusting. And then the other one is a prisoner who is who's being transported to Coruscant, and he's a crazed individual and a crazed criminal who basically leaves OSHA to crash land on a planet and takes the last pod after she just freed him. So probably trying to send a message through that as well, because these people are always trying to sell identity politics messaging. That is indeed how they promoted the show. So I will agree with Paul Tassi that is indeed part of the backlash, because that's how they promoted it. But that does not mean that people are a racist or misogynist. It just means that they recognize that the show is anti-white and they're sick of it. We've also seen showrunner Leslye Headland attack fans in the New York Times, telling the outlet this: as a fan myself, I know how frustrating some Star Wars storytelling in the past has been. I felt it myself. She then declared that Star Wars fans who oppose wokeness are not actually Star Wars fans. She said, I stand by my empathy for Star Wars fans, but I want to be clear. Anyone who engages in bigotry, racism, or hate speech, I don't consider a fan. We all know that those are buzzwords for anyone opposing woke ideology. They don't actually mean what they mean, because we see the show is all about pushing racism. And that's how they've marketed it. We also had Headland basically confirming that the show is the gayest Star Wars ever. And then she even says that C-3PO is gay and that R2-D2 is a lesbian. Absolutely degenerate, disgusting behavior intended to mock and belittle Star Wars fans. Joke's on her. People are roasting the show. They're actually laughing at her. And then we also had Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy in the same interview with the New York Times, where Leslye Headland attacked Star Wars fans. Kathleen Kennedy did as well. She says, my belief is that storytelling does need to be representative of all people. That's an easy decision for me. That's utterly ridiculous. I don't think we should be representing people who still believe in the Aztec way of life and human sacrifice. Just utterly ridiculous. Why would you want to represent that unless you're actually showing it for what it is, being evil? And I probably wouldn't have I wouldn't have a problem with that. But what these people do is they try and depict evil as good. And that's what they mean by being representative. And it's usually just based on identity politics, skin color, etc. She continues saying, operating within these giant franchises now with social media and the level of expectations terrifying. I think Leslye has struggled a little bit with it. I think a lot of the women who step into Star Wars struggle with this a bit more. Because of the fan base being so male dominated, they sometimes get attacked in ways that can be quite personal. So again, attacking males, but also admitting that the Star Wars fan base is males and that she's actively been trying to erode that by creating feminist propaganda. All that's done is erode the fan base. And now she's doing it even more by attacking the male fan base that is still watching the show, that is not interested in lesbian gay propaganda that Leslye Headland has created. As for why woke ideology is evil, if you've been watching any of my videos, you know that I do cite Bishop Barron on this. I think it's a really good breakdown. He said this in an interview with Angelus News, and he points to this. First, they advocate a deeply antagonistic social theory whereby the world is divided sharply into the two classes of oppressors and oppressed. Second, they relativize moral value and see classical morality as an attempt by the ruling class to maintain itself in power. Third, they focus not so much on the individual as on racial and ethnic categories. Obviously, Paul Tassi that's exactly what he's doing. And I would say sex categories as well. And hence, they endorse the idea of collective guilt and recommend a sort of reverse discrimination to address the injustices of the past. Fourth, they tend to demonize the market economy and the institutions of democracy as part of a superstructure defending the privileged. Fifth, they push toward equity of outcome throughout the society rather than equality of opportunity. And finally, wokeism employs divisive and aggressive strategies of accusation that are contrary to the gospel demand to love our enemies. You see that with Paul Tassi. He is accusing you of being racist, of being misogynist. And that is what he does in that article. That's the whole point of his article, is to make those accusations. It's disgusting. It is evil. It is wokeism. And that's why we must oppose this stuff, because it is contrary to the gospel demand to love our enemies. And while I can point out that Paul Tassi and what he's doing is evil, that does not mean I will not pray for him, because I will pray for him. I will pray that God softens his heart, that he comes to realize what he is doing is carrying water for evil, that he is indeed promoting evil, and that he should stop and he should repent. And I encourage everyone watching this to pray for him as well. One of the prayers that I like to use is the Hail Mary, asking our mother for intercession on behalf of individuals such as Paul Tassi. I will probably pray one for him after this video. Anyways, Bishop Barron goes on and says, suffice it to say that Catholic social teaching stands athwart all of this. It wants social justice, of course, but not on woke terms. Its heroes are not Marx, Nietzsche, and Foucault, but rather are Isaiah, Amos, Jeremiah, Jesus the Lord, Ambrose, Aquinas, and Teresa of Calcutta. So obviously showing the clear difference between the gospel, Catholic social teaching, and wokeism. And then for like the last kind of big point here, George Lucas made it abundantly clear that the people leading Lucasfilm, people in charge of Disney Star Wars, have no understanding of Star Wars or the Force. He said this at the Cannes Film Festival just ahead of the release of The Acolyte. He says, I was the one who really knew what Star Wars was, who actually knew this world, because there's a lot to it. The Force, for example, nobody understood the Force. When they started other ones, after I sold the company, a lot of the ideas that were in the original sort of got lost, but that's the way it is. You give it up, you give it up. So it's almost like he's encouraging people to encourage other people to be like, hey, it's over. It's not the same Star Wars anymore. I've given it up. You should too. But I also want to point out that he did this ahead of The Acolyte. I think it's very clear that he's pointing out that this is not what he believes is the Force. It is not what he sees as Star Wars. But those are my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you make of Paul Tassi just basically making these absolutely heinous, evil accusations and completely seething and coping because viewers and Star Wars fans are rejecting this degenerate lesbian propaganda, lesbian feminist propaganda coming out of Disney Star Wars in The Acolyte. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, but to always speak the truth.